withering criticism of the agreement the president signed with Iran, and a lot of it is coming from members of his own party. And this morning, before dawn, the president indicated he does not like these comments one bit. Now, the concerns raised include the pause in sanctions allowing Iran to sell oil immediately, the lack of specifics on curbing Iran's nuclear program, the opening for Iran to ultimately charge fees for ships to transit the Strait of Hormuz, and beyond the text of the plan, criticisms of the new comments that the president himself made suggesting Iran should be allowed to have missiles, even though one of the stated goals of the whole war was to destroy their missiles. Listen now to the critics.
Now, I don't want to see theocratic Islamists who want to kill us made stronger. So if this deal is giving them $300 billion, that's a mistake.
They're better off than they were before the hostilities began. And that should not be the consequence of war.
Some calling it an American surrender, saying it's even worse than the Obama deal of 2015. Now, Nikki Haley called it a, quote, huge mistake to pay to rebuild the threat we just destroyed. Senator Ted Cruz told the Daily Wire he felt like Trump was getting very poor advice and called it ill-advised. In the meantime, Senator Bill Cassidy took it one step further.
This will go down as a tremendous foreign policy blunder. Iran ends up stronger. Our allies in the region are weaker. And Iran has learned that if they're willing to grab that Strait of Hormuz and choke it off, they can get the Western world to dance to their tune. I think it's a deep mistake.
How do you know the president doesn't like these comments? Around 4:30 a.m. this morning, he wrote, quote, these fools who think I haven't been tough enough on Iran are either jealous, bad people, or stupid.
Joining us now, CNN political commentators S.E. Cupp, former Trump White House Communications Director Anthony Scaramucci, author of the upcoming book, All the Wrong Moves, How Three Catastrophic Decisions Led to the Rise of Trump, and Republican strategist Brad Todd. Anthony, what do you think of the deal?
Well, it's so hard to believe that I actually thought it can't be true. And we look through the numbers, like, okay, there's no way that this is the deal. And I think he's pinned now because the reaction is so bad that he'll now start lying about it and saying, okay, that wasn't really the deal. Go look at this shiny object over here and let's pretend that that's not the deal. So the market thus far has not reacted poorly. But I expect it to as this unfolds.
He also seems to be now kind of pointing the finger at J.D. Vance a little bit, kind of almost kind of setting him up as the fall guy.
Yeah, I think in the beginning of the war, you'll probably remember, it seemed like he was setting up Pete Hegseth, right? Remember, he pointed at Pete in a meeting and he was like, this was Pete's idea. Seems like he's shifted to J.D. Vance now owns, I guess, the conclusion of this war, where Pete maybe owned the beginning. But listen, for a lot of Republicans, myself a former Republican included, we have a long memory of the JCPOA, and I remember the condemnation of that for good reason. It wasn't a great deal. Next to that deal, this looks like the Magna Carta of deals. Like, this looks like a treaty. I mean, or that looked like the Magna Carta of deals next to Trump's. It's just so bad. It doesn't leave us with much of anything we didn't have before. In fact, our economy is weaker. Our allies and our enemies don't trust our might anymore. We've watched Trump capitulate on a bunch of things. I just don't see how he can stay face with this if the details stay as they are.
Anderson, I want you to imagine a scenario where the Obama administration, the Biden administration created $1 trillion of economic damage, $1 billion a day to fight a war. When the war was over, the straits closed, and we're going to give $300 billion of reparations, and nothing resolved on the nuclear situation.
And if Biden had been praising like the mullahs and the leaders there,
it's okay to have missiles. Everybody's got a few missiles here and there. There would be outrage like you can't believe. So I guess the big question is, how does Trump still get away with it? What is it about his Teflon that allows him to get away with something like this? And I think as we get closer to the midterms and over the midterms, despite his stronghold on the primary voters in the Republican Party, I think the traditional Republicans are going to really break from him.
Brad, I want to play what President Trump said actually about J.D. Vance.
There's some element to this where you send the vice president. If it works out, great, you look like a genius for sending him. And if it doesn't work out, It's the vice president's.
I like that idea, sure. Well, this way, if it works out, I'm going to take the credit. If it doesn't work out, I'm blaming JD. You better be careful, JD. He's going to turn his plane around and get the hell out of here. Yeah, I like that idea. I think it's a good idea.
Brad, Republican Senator Bill Cassidy also said that this agreement is going to leave Iran stronger, our allies weaker. There's precedent for Iran to use control over the Strait of Hormuz as leverage. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
Well, I think the president should have said the vice president didn't read the art of the MOU. I don't know about the art of the deal here yet. And this is just a memorandum of understanding. I certainly hope the final deal will be better. And I think
you think there's going to be a final deal?
There's a right to be skeptical, but there are some carrots in there for the Iranians at the end of a final deal, which is the U.S. forces don't have to leave the region until 30 days after a final deal. Hopefully that this final deal will be worth leaving over. This certainly is not. I'm in touch with a lot of Republican elected officials and candidates, and I've not heard one of them today say that what they've heard so far on this MOU is a good idea. I think that's an indication that it's a political problem. And the president's not on the ballot anymore, but the vice president might want to run one day, and I think it could be a very big political problem for him in the future.
Do either of you see there actually being a nuclear agreement? Ellen Iyer was like 60 days, 120 days, doesn't matter the length of time. There's not really leverage over the Iranian regime.
Just by way of example, the JCPOA took 2 years to ratify that deal, to come to these specifics, because the devil is always in the details with these. And Iran is patient. Iran has been planning and preparing for a war of attrition with the United States for 20 years. They are cheering this deal. And I think if they think that they can actually walk Trump over the finish line because he is desperate, he's tired, he's bored of this, and it's a midterm election year, I think that's what they're hoping for. They're holding out that they can actually walk him across the finish line on these details.
Anthony, do you think this affects the midterms at all?
I think on the margin it affects the midterms, because the midterms to me still is going to be about affordability, and I don't think anything gets done here, and I think there'll be higher oil prices leading into the midterms, and if the Democrats can get it together and coalesce, they have a big statement against the president and his party.
But it's not just the Democrats. You're absolutely right about that. It's Republicans. You've already mentioned a bunch of Republicans
they'll start
who are mad about it.
They'll start breaking.
It's not just congressional Republicans who are up for re-election. Trump doesn't seem to care. It's also voters. It's Republican voters who didn't want this war, who don't want the consequences of this war, namely higher gas prices. They don't want any part of this. So I think it will have kind of a ripple effect for the midterms.
I would agree and disagree with SC on that, Anderson. I think the war most Republicans did want to back the war. They do want to take out Iran. I think it's one place I disagree with SC on it. But there is a pressure on the Republican coalition. There is a foreign policy wing of the Republican coalition, and they're really capitalist suburbanites. And they've not always been Trump's biggest fans. I don't think this will help him with them. And then there are more blue-collar people who are very cost-sensitive on local affairs and economic affairs. I think this potentially could help with them. But this is you don't want to be talking about half your coalition being happy with anything. And I think if the final deal is not better, this is a real electoral problem for the president.
It also seems like, there was an administration official which talked about kind of a gentleman's agreement with Iran about certain aspects of the negotiations, and that the U.S. official told CNN either side could walk away from talks over the next 60 days.
A lot of this seems to be like honor system, which, again, should make everyone deeply suspicious. There were some provisions in Obama's deal. For example, the supposedly anytime, anywhere inspections ended up giving Iran 24 days delay for them to hide stuff before inspectors came. Like, Iran's good at this. They are good at getting these carve-outs into these deals. So Iran is going to be patient. Iran is going to wait. And I think they like this framework so far.
Anderson, when the Iranians call this an exemplification of America's failure, the deal, is that part of the gentleman's agreement, or is that non-gentlemanly?
Anthony, somebody who knows the president, worked for him. How does he look? Like, how does he seem to you? Just in talking, maybe he's been traveling internationally. His schedule is grueling.
Listen, I'm not in the president's got dementia camp. I think he's healthy. For an 80-year-old, that he has a prodigious level of energy. He went from a UFC fight on Saturday to France.
It's grueling.
And so you got to give them credit for all that. But what I really think the problem is they're afraid of him. And there's a decision-making committee.
The people around him are afraid.
Yeah, there's a decision-making committee of one. And they don't want to get in his crosshairs. They don't want to get fired. They like the significance of being around him and flying around on the big plane. And so if Abraham Lincoln had a team of rivals, the president has a hall of mirrors. And they're all trying to reflect to him what he wants. And I think it's very dangerous because straight shooters would go to him and say, well, this is a disaster. Let's get in a room with a group of negotiators and let's game theory what we need to do to better our position here.
But you know him particularly well in terms of his salesmanship. I don't think he bothered to sell this war.
Yeah.
Oh, obviously not. No, I mean that was a big problem with the NATO coalition.
SC Cup, Anthony Scaramucci. Thanks, Brad Todd, as well.
Let's get to CNN's Betsy Klein live at the White House this morning. Might not be a happy morning there for the president as he is now back for the G7.
Yeah, John, when the president was in France yesterday holding this press conference, he had one very specific goal, and that was to convince a skeptical public, including Republicans, that this deal that he had reached with Iran was both different from the Obama-era Iran deal and a good deal for the United States. Now, he says that it's going to prevent Iran from procuring or producing a nuclear weapon, and that it will reopen the Strait of Hormuz. The president's seeking to defend the waivers that allow Iran to export oil and the provision that commits the U.S. and regional partners to developing a $300 billion reconstruction and economic development fund that he says the U.S. will not provide any money to. But he also said very revealing comments that he is in part signing this agreement to avoid economic catastrophe by ending this conflict. He said if it had gone on any longer, it could have led to that, and also said that he didn't want to be Herbert Hoover, of course, referring to the U.S. president who presided over the Great Depression. But the president signing a hard copy of this agreement last night during a dinner at the Palace of Versailles before returning to Washington overnight. What's unclear now is whether this deal has actually started that 60-day clock for the more technical discussions on Iran's nuclear material. The president has suggested himself that that deadline is flexible. Meanwhile, the White House fielding new criticism about this deal, including in Iran, where one newspaper says that the U.S. has suffered, quote, a glorious defeat, and from lawmakers, including Senator Ted Cruz, who warned it could be a mistake, as well as Senator Bill Cassidy of Louisiana, who has sparred with the White House recently. He said in a post to social media that it could be the worst foreign policy blunder in decades. Now, Vice President J.D. Vance is expected to travel to Switzerland, where he is going to meet with Iran as well as mediators Pakistan and Qatar. They are going to have initial talks about implementation of this deal, according to the Swiss, John.
His comments about Herbert Hoover seem to be a tacit admission that Iran's economic strategy might have been working. Betsy Klein at the White House this morning. We will see what more the president has to say if he gets back on social media. Thank you.